Hello and welcome to the Retail Week, our regular review of the biggest talking points across the sector from the past 7 days. I'm Luke Tugby, Head of Content at Retail Week, and I'm joined by Gemma Goldfingal, our Features Editor, and George MacDonald, our Executive Editor. So guys, Next became the first retailer to reveal its Christmas trading figures today. Online up fairly healthily as we'd expect, and store sales down. George, let's start with you. What do you think that tells us about the story of retail's Christmas generally?
Yeah, I think just before we talk about the numbers, it tells us something quite interesting, I hope. Before Christmas, on this, we were saying we thought maybe Christmas would be all right on the night. People started to get quite worried in the immediate run-up to Christmas when you had things like the administration of HMV. But what I hope the next update, apart from anything else, might tell us about retail's Christmas is that in general it will have been all right on the night. There were no profit warnings preceding Next, and I think a lot of us thought we might come back to work after a new year, and the first thing we would get would be some profit warnings. So I'm hoping that in that respect, aside from the numbers, it is representative of Christmas, and given the fact that there haven't been any warnings yet, let's hope so.
Do you agree, Gemma?
Do you know what? I'm very surprised, actually, as you said, that there haven't been any profit warnings so far, and I think that can only be a good thing. I don't think it's been a vintage Christmas. Next is, decent, I would say. I think you mentioned it was ahead of expectations, which is good. But, Next has been known as a bit of a bellwether for the industry.
Yeah.
And as much as, broadly speaking, online doing better than stores is the trend we've been seeing for a number of years. I don't think Next really is representative of the wider industry when it comes to online, because its directory business is so heavily branded that it's kind of like an ASOS for middle-aged people, isn't it? Every brand under the sun's on there. That maybe looking at the real difference between stores and online is really looking at the difference between Net's branded products and the wealth of brands that it sells in directories. I don't necessarily think it is a big indicator.
Yeah, I take the point, but I think some of those specifics acknowledged, I think it is telling a general story. And with a number like I think it was just over 9% down in stores. Versus just over 15% up online. I think people will use those numbers to sort of benchmark themselves against, and then there's scope for a little bit of leeway either side about the extent to which own brand versus a variety of brands makes a difference. But I think this must be the big ongoing story of online accounting for ever rising sales and stores under pressure, and I guess people will be looking for ways of melding the channels together ever more and getting them to complement each other.
Well, no, yeah, broadly speaking, absolutely right. And Next's decent performance is because it is one of the retailers that does that incredibly well.
And you mentioned, Gemma, rightly so, Next is seen as a bellwether. It's been more resilient than most. It's always been middling to good, particularly as far as fashion is concerned, and it does tend to outperform the market in 9 times out of 10. Can we really say then that the likes of Debenhams and M&S are going to be all right on the night, as you put it, George?
I think, as George says, the very telling thing is that there's no profit warning, so it suggests that it possibly has been all right in the night. But I think you're right that Next you would expect to do better than those retailers. We can but see, but I don't think it's been a vintage Christmas.
No, not at all. I mean, like all right on the night is the best it's going to be, and some of the others still to report. I think a bit like with Next, this will happen, I'm sure, across the board. profit expectations will be trimmed, and there's a bit of space given what expectations now are for that to happen without there being warnings. But no, it's not going to be a real way hey Christmas.
But I think this time, a couple of weeks before Christmas, the real worry is we'd come out of a dreadful November, particularly for fashion retailers, and we had a wealth of people triggering profit warners. ASOS as well, so we've talked about how online's a differentiator.
Yeah, I mean, Next as well, so again, perhaps something that does epitomise the trend. November was really difficult for them too. When I was talking to Lord Wolfson, he put it entirely down to the weather. He said, literally there wasn't a frosty morning, so that really hit cold weather gear. The other interesting thing is the extent to which Next sort of bounced back in the final few weeks to Christmas, which I think was the case at John Lewis as well. So again, maybe without taking too many hostages to fortune, that might be applicable to other retailers.
I do. I think speaking to people before Christmas, the retailers were saying they had an awful big shortfall to make up in those last few weeks before Christmas. So it's great news that Next has done that. Even in terms of footfall, we've talked about the difference between, online and stores, but looking at Springboard's figures, that final week before actually between the 23rd, because you had those extra trading days before Christmas, to the end of the year, footfall was actually up, which is positive as well. So I think there was a bit of a late surge.
I think you're right. I think given where we were in November and that late surge that was needed, I think trimming is the word you would use, George. I think the market would accept a trimming of forecast as opposed to slashing a forecast, and that is, we should probably see that as all right on the night given the backdrop.
I suppose there might be some fairly heavy pruning going on.
We'll look out for that. But just to come, George, you mentioned that you spoke to Lord Wolfson, and to come back to the point about the stores and online disparity and the polarising fortunes there. What was Lord Wolfson's mood in terms of what this all means for high street businesses?
Yeah, well, he said, that the performance of online and stores really showed the direction of travel. And he said that he thought that people need to sort of wake up to the reality that in future the high street, town centres, aren't going to be full of clothes shops as they are now. They can't be. And he also said that, that era is over, but also he thought, therefore, so is or should be the era of sky-high rents. So he was very much in favour of town centres really getting on the front foot to reinvent themselves. He didn't think there was any blueprint that should be applied. In fact, he thought it would be bad if people started applying a blueprint to all circumstances. So more change to come.
I thought what he said as well about the consumer was quite interesting. So I think you're right, George, before Christmas and during Christmas with the administration of HMV, in the wake of Christmas, there was a real kind of pessimism about the high street and the consumers and how they're feeling. And, he said it's not, they're not feeling particularly bad.
Yeah, he was pretty confident on that, maybe surprisingly so. I'm not sure all retailers will share that view, actually. Maybe that might be one of the differences between Next and some of its peers.
Yeah.
Well, we're just about out of time, guys, but thanks very much for your thoughts. Please do let us know your thoughts on whether it be Next trading specifically or Christmas more generally. And do join us next week on Super Thursday when we'll be discussing updates from the likes of John Lewis, M&S, Debenhams and Tesco. We'll see you then.